So thank you for tuning in tonight to learn about some fruits that you could add to your landscape. My name is Luke Gustafson, and I work with University of Maryland Extension. And let's see. And in my position, I have been with Extension for about 6 years now, a little over 6 years, working out of the office in Charles County. University of Maryland Extension is the outreach arm of University of Maryland. We have an office in every county in the state and Baltimore City. And we provide a non-formal education to the people of Maryland. And I work specifically with in home horticulture. I work with homeowners, and I coordinate the Master Gardener Volunteer Program in Charles County. So thank you, all the Charles County residents that tuned in tonight. My position is funded through Charles County, so thank you for your tax dollars support my position, and I appreciate that. And I'm a resource to you all, and so certainly once our offices reopen, feel free to stop by, but you can still reach me, and I'm still available to answer questions by email or phone. I'm a resource to homeowners, to home gardeners like you all. So tonight, I'm really excited that I can talk about something that I really love, and that is growing edible stuff, growing fruit in this case, in the home landscape. Just a quick outline of tonight's talk. First, some of the why. For me, that's an easy answer, but there might be different reasons, different motivations that you all have as to why you are interested in growing fruit. I'll get into some of the how with site preparation, soil preparation, a little bit about planting, and then the rest of tonight I'll be talking about the what. So I selected a number of different species, different fruits for home landscapes. It's not that those are the only ones out there, but these are ones that can do well in a lot of home landscapes in Maryland. They perform well, and they're generally lower maintenance than some of the things that you might first think of when you think about growing fruit in the landscape. And I think it's nice too to just try something different, a little bit unique, add some diversity to the landscape. So the why, a big part of it is to enjoy something that's fresh, something that is unique, compared to a vegetable garden. The nice thing about fruit crops is that they are perennials, so you don't have to be digging and disturbing the soil each planting season. So they're crops that you can plant and tend over a number of years, and hopefully with enough care, be harvesting over a number of years. They also can provide color throughout the seasons in terms of both the flowers as well as the fall colors. A number of these different plants that we'll be talking about provide a nice color show in multiple seasons. And I really do think that you can have your landscape and eat it too, that you can have plants that play multiple roles. They can be beautiful and delicious at the same time. Because I think that's what a lot of people are looking for is to get more out of their landscape. They don't want just a plant that looks good or that has beautiful flowers in the springtime. They want multi-season interest, and they want multi-use out of the plant. So I think it's a great way to kind of think about your landscape is getting more use out of it. All right. See if I can get the slide to advance. All right. All right. Okay, so why these unique fruits? again, this is not comprehensive. My goal is to just give you some ideas of some of the fruits that you might add to your landscape. And there's others that are out there that I don't have time to include tonight, but are good to consider. But the ones that I have, there's something that's a little bit unique. Many of them are not readily available in grocery stores, or you can buy them, but only in season, or they tend to be expensive. We're looking at ones that are adapted to growing well in Maryland and in the Mid-Atlantic. Ones that are generally less or lower maintenance, less pesticide intensive. So these are ones that even if you don't apply pesticides, that you won't have that you'll still be able to harvest. You won't have a total crop failure most years, like is the case with some of the more challenging fruits in this region, fruits like peaches and nectarines, where you have some key pests and diseases that really make it difficult to grow them without a lot of intensive management and maintenance. So that's really one of the goals of growing some of these fruits. Just thinking ahead, some important considerations are, what's my property, what space do I have, what time do I have, and how much am I willing to commit to growing some fruits. Time in the preparation, the planting, and also the ongoing maintenance. What kind of pruning might it need? Think about what's practical for you and your schedule. For example, if you typically are out of town in August, or you're really busy a certain part of the summer or fall, and that's the time when this fruit is ripening, then maybe you want to look at a later ripening variety, or look at a different fruit altogether. So part of this depends on how it fits into your goals, your landscape, and your lifestyle. Ideally, you want to start planning well in advance. Now I know it's the end of April, and you're thinking about planning things now this year, and you can still do that. You might start off with just planting one this year, and then this season make a plan for the following year. Certainly, availability of plants is a seasonal question. The more popular varieties of some plants will sell out and might not be available. So you'll have to think about ordering placing an order earlier, like in January or February, depending on the supplier and the particular plant you're looking for. I encourage you to think about ordering bare root plants or plug-sized plants. Those are smaller, and so they're less expensive to ship and to purchase. And oftentimes, high-quality bare root plants, even though they don't look like a whole lot, when you get them in the mail, you don't have some of the issues that you might with container-grown plants, like root-bound issues, and oftentimes those smaller plants can outgrow their larger container-grown cousins after 2, 3, or 4 years. Site selection, think about your property. Think about where you get the most sun. Some of these plants can tolerate part sun, but most of them, they really want full sun for maximum production. And even if they're a species that, in nature has adapted to much shady conditions, for maximum fruit production, you're going to want a full sun location. Think about water, because especially when you're getting your plants established, the first season and also the second season, they're going to need water. If you think back to 2019 and in Maryland, the really dry weather that we had from basically mid-July through mid-October, we had very little rain. So that's the time of year where you're really going to want to pay attention to the rainfall and make sure you're getting water on your establishing plants so they can thrive. Wildlife can always be an issue. That varies a lot from location to location. I don't go into it a lot tonight, other than there are different ways to deal with that. Fencing, you can put up rings of fencing around individual fruit trees as one way to keep deer off them or to reduce deer browsing. Again, it's really location dependent, and it can be a challenge. Think about how much you can maintain. I encourage people to always start small and then expand from there, so you don't just get frustrated the first year and throw in the towel. I like to use Google Maps, so you can just pull up your house on Google Maps and take a picture, and you can look down. If you look down the bottom right, they put the scale, and so you can see approximate distances. You can also get out in the yard with a measuring tape, but if you take a screenshot like on Google Maps or other satellite imagery, you can get a general idea of the layout of your property. Now, it doesn't have the slope, so that's important to keep in mind. But it, is kind of a quick way to sketch out your property. You could use this and pull out some graphing paper or whatever your preferred way is to make a quick sketch of your yard to get a general idea of what you might be able to fit in your area and how much space you want to dedicate to a new garden. For example, if you're creating a new garden bed to add some of these plants that we're going to talk about tonight. So that's a good quick resource that we all have access to. Now, soil testing is also part of the preparation. So your basic soil test will tell you the pH of the soil, which is in most cases, for the ones we're going to talk about tonight, I don't cover blueberry. If you're going to grow blueberry, you will want to acidify the soil. So in that case, you want a pH of 4.5 to 5.5. For the crops that we're going to talk about tonight, about 6.5 is ideal, close to neutral, but really anything from about 5.5 to 7 should be okay for the crops that we're going to talk about tonight. Your soil test results, depending on the lab you choose, the results will be reported a little bit differently, but again, it'll cover pH as well as your major nutrients, so phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and the other bars in this example are some of the macronutrients or the micronutrients. So those are the main important part would be the macronutrients and correcting deficiencies that you might see in those, as well as the pH. So your basic soil test package is usually sufficient for most home gardens and home plantings. And that, again, is about $10 to $15 from most soil testing labs. Cultivars, picking cultivars really does make a big difference, especially for plants that have some really key pests or key diseases especially. And we'll talk about that in a few cases tonight. So in general, you want to pick cultivars that have some amount of resistance to the most common diseases in the region. So here in the Mid-Atlantic, Things like fire blight on pears is a big deal. That can, in a bad year, completely kill a tree if you're growing a really susceptible variety. So that's really important to think about before you plant. Think about and select the varieties that are more resistant to those key diseases. Like I mentioned, bare root plants often catch up to container-grown plants. So if you've never planted fruit trees or never planted bare root trees, if you get this little stick in the mail with a few fine roots coming off it, no, you weren't cheated. That's what it's supposed to look like because they come dormant. And they will, if you take care of them, they will come to life and they will, if taken care of, thrive in their new location. With some species, there is more than one that is required for pollination. So you might have to select 2 or 3 varieties for optimal fruit production, whereas other crops will be self-fruitful, where you can get by just having one individual plant and not have to buy multiple cultivars. Pollination. We all know pollination is important, and most fruits do require pollination from bees or other insect pollinators. This time of year, we see a lot of our native bees. We see bumblebees, mason bees, and others out. Honeybees also are important pollinators, especially in commercial production. And so a lot of these fruits will attract some of those pollinators to our garden. As far as pesticide use, in the resource list, there's a good, very comprehensive publication on pesticide use. But I just want to mention that if you are using insecticides, especially, and other pesticides, to always follow the label on that particular product. That will have the restrictions and instructions for proper application, but avoid or reduce pesticide use, and don't spray when the flowers are open and the bees and other pollinators are out foraging on the flowers, because we want to conserve our pollinators. They're doing a lot of great work for us out there in the garden. As far as other maintenance, watering and fertilizing, again, yeah, when it's wet out, especially in May and June, oftentimes in Maryland, we get plenty of rain. But as things get drier, going into the summertime, that's when you want to keep an eye on your young plants and get water on them before the soil dries out and they experience drought stress. Fertilizers, go back to that soil test. That will have recommendations for adjusting the pH as well as for fertilizers. Be careful not to over-fertilize. Oftentimes, especially in when you're just getting a plant in the ground, it's not pulling up a lot of nutrients at that point, so it's not necessary to fertilize. And a lot of times, if you want to not fertilize your fruit plants, you'll still get production, but you might get increased production with adding the proper fertilizers. Weed control is really important, especially in establishment. Those young plant roots, they're competing with weeds, with grass. If you're growing in adding these into an area of your lawn, you want to make sure to eliminate the competition with grass and with other weeds to help your young plants get established. And ideally, if you can have about a 6-foot diameter circle around your young plants, then you're roots will be able to compete, and they won't have to compete for water and nutrients with the grass. Now, things like Bermuda grass can be difficult to control by just manual removal. So you might consider using herbicides to control some of those really persistent perennial weeds like Bermuda grass or wiregrass before you plant, because it can be pretty difficult to control them even with a thick layer of mulch. It's hard to smother some of those persistent perennial weeds with mulch. But you do want to use a mulch to keep down the weed pressure, and ideally keeping a weed-free zone bigger than the one that's pictured in the photo. Like I mentioned, about a 6-foot diameter around your fruit trees and shrubs. All right. So one option for mulch is Arborist wood chip mulch. This is often available from tree companies. If you have a tree company that's in the neighborhood, you can talk with the crew and possibly get them to dump a whole lot of mulch in your driveway. So it's great if you have a large area to spread this over. It's a great way to recycle. It's reducing the diesel fuel that they are burning, taking it to wherever they are dumping this, because it's a waste product for them, and it can be a really useful mulch for you. So oftentimes they will require you to take the whole load, so it could be 10 yards or so of mulch. So maybe you can share it with your friend. There's also groups online on Facebook and places like that can help connect you with arborists in the area. Just a close-up shot. So it's generally speaking, Arborist wood chips mulch is a coarse mulch, so it really does work well as a landscape mulch, and including around fruit trees and shrubs. This is a close-up of what it can look like. Now, you don't have to wait to apply this to your landscape. The fresh mulch will not harm your plants, so it's not necessary to let it age. You can apply that directly to your garden beds. Wildlife, yeah, they can be an issue. Deer browsing or voles. This is obviously the results of deer browsing on plants. Voles can cause damage by feeding on the trunks of fruit trees and shrubs, especially in the winter time, feeding on that nutritious inner bark. So that can certainly be a challenge, and there's a lot more information on Maryland's Home and Garden Information Center about dealing with wildlife. I'm not going to go too much into it, other than it can be an issue, and oftentimes you have to kind of factor in a number of different issues to figure out what the best control approach is for you in your landscape. Pruning, not something that we're doing right away in most cases, unless you get a tree in the mail and part of it is broken off, but something that you want to learn about if you're new to growing fruit and you're adding fruit trees to your landscape. Something to learn about and to study up on for down the road. Pruning is done to control the size and shape of a tree or shrub, and in fruiting trees and shrubs, it's also done to increase fruit production. So getting rid of some of the older wood that's less productive, or some of the branches that are not growing in the right direction. So oftentimes there's more damage done by not pruning than there is by improper pruning. So, don't be too afraid to prune. Certainly read up about it and learn about it, but you don't need to really worry about it for the first year if you're just getting started with fruit. For example, overgrown apple tree like this that hasn't been pruned very much, you can still do things to make the tree more productive by removing a bunch of the extra wood in there, and over a series of pruning it a number of years, you can get an older tree, for example, this apple, into a more productive tree. All right, so that's kind of going through some of the background and considerations. And so now I'm going to get into some of the different fruit trees or shrubs that you might consider for your landscape. And the first one I have here tonight is Aronia. And this is also known as chokeberry, although I think people are using the term Aronia more now because it sells better. Chokeberry doesn't sound nearly as appetizing. So this is a shrub, a fruiting shrub that is native to much of the eastern U.S. and is actually used, it's available in the commercial nursery industry as an ornamental already. So you might be able to find it at your local garden center as an ornamental plant, and it does have ornamental value, certainly. In the bottom photo, you can see that it's in bloom there. It blooms kind of late April to mid-May, at least in Maryland. And it's about 4 to 6 feet tall. It can get taller, but it's pretty easy to keep it pruned to that 4 to 6 foot range. So if you have a spot in your landscape where that fits the bill, that size, then this is one to consider. It is sometimes used in rain gardens. I've seen it in a number of rain garden plant lists. You can use it on kind of in a naturalized garden or the edge, the border of your garden, where you're going kind of from more formal to a more naturalized look. And you can use it as an alternative to some of the invasive shrubs that we see in landscapes, some of the things like privet or euonymus, as well as kind of an alternative to viburnum. It has pretty nice fall colors. So you can see in the photo on the left there, the reddish and yellow fall colors. And then it has in August, it ripens these berries. These are, there in that photo there, you can see in the hand, kind of gives you a scale for the ripe berries there. They look like tiny little apples, and that's because they are in the rose family, just like apples and a lot of your other fruits. And these guys look like tiny mini apples. They are very high in antioxidants. So they are the highest, the most concentrated antioxidant activity of any of your temperate fruits. And most of that antioxidant activity comes from the anthocyanins, or those purple and bluish pigments that you can see that's staining that hand. Those pigments also mean that it makes a really rich purple jelly or juice. So this one here, Aronia, is really best for juices and preserves, and not so much for fresh eating. It does have a fair amount of astringency, so it kind of makes your mouth pucker. The nice thing about Aronia, or one of the nice things, is that after the fruits ripen, they still remain attached to the stem, and oftentimes they will stay attached. I mean, unless the birds get there first, they'll stay attached even as they start to dry out. So even if you miss them at their peak of ripeness, they will remain attached just like a cluster of raisin grapes will remain attached to the vine. There's 2 varieties out there that have really been developed and bred for their berry production, or there's 2 main varieties. There's a few others, Viking and Nero. They're pretty similar. One tends to be a little bit taller than the other, and those are the ones that you'll see most commonly for fruit production. If you are at a mail order nursery's website, you should be able to find one or both of those varieties. And interestingly, with Aronia, although it's native to the eastern U.S., most of the commercial production of Aronia is in Eastern Europe. So there's a very small commercial production of Aronia in the U.S., but the majority of the industry is in Europe. All right. See if we can switch to the next slide. All right. Next species is elderberry, which is also native to eastern U.S. And this species, it was once considered a separate species, but now Sambucus nigra, the native one that we have growing around here, is considered a subspecies. So elderberry is also native to Europe, and it's grown a lot there commercially. If you go to England, you might see elderberry, elderflower cordial, or elderberry juices and things like that, as well as other parts of Western Europe. Germany and Poland also have elderberry industry. They produce juices and jelly from that. This plant grows pretty commonly in the wild, especially in southern Maryland. I've seen it a lot in the roadsides and ditches, as well as in the eastern shore. You see it pretty commonly. It's the one that's blooming with those big white flower heads in late May and early June. It doesn't have a whole lot of big disease issues. There's some leaf spot diseases, but they don't cause much problem. It can take some water, so you could think about adding this if you've got a rain garden. It doesn't require standing water or anything like that, but it can handle standing water for a period of time. The nice thing about elderberry is that it's very easy to propagate. So on the picture on the left, those are ones that I had purchased. Those are small plug plants. I think the plant itself is probably, each one's maybe 7 or so inches tall. I grew those, and after they got established, I took some cuttings, hardwood cuttings. So in the winter or early spring before they leafed out, I took cuttings and I potted those up, and you can propagate them. So the photo there in the bottom right is a plant that I grew out from cutting for a season, and I potted up into a larger pot. So if you have some of these in your landscape, you can start small. You don't have to buy a whole lot, and then if you've got time and patience, you can expand your garden without spending a whole lot of money. So for example, this is the second year I planted elderberry there up close to the fence, and had propagated more of them and extended my planting of elderberry further out into the lawn, so reducing the amount of grass. And actually there's erosion issues. When it rained a bunch, water would flow down through this area. So adding the wood chip mulch with the elderberry and their fibrous root system was able to reduce some of the erosion issues that we had in this. And that's what it looks like in August when they are full of ripe fruit. The heads typically depending on the variety, will just, under the weight of the berries, kind of turn over. The birds will still find them, so sometimes you'll see them doing acrobatics, hanging on kind of upside down on the berry cluster. But I've found that I've been able to get plenty of elderberry and not have to chase the birds away too much, because I have a pretty good amount there, enough to harvest and enough to share. There's also varieties that have been developed and selected for their reddish or maroon foliage. So if you want just an ornamental use elderberry, here's a couple examples of what that looks like in the landscape. So the one on the right there out at the Extension Office in Washington County, beautiful demo garden there. That one is kind of a arborized, or a plant that's been pruned into more of a tree form. So that's one way that you could prune an elderberry if that's the look you wanted. And then the other two in front of the brick house there kind of frame the front door. And so, yeah, these are really ones that they haven't been developed and selected for their fruit quality. So they would be ones that you want to use more for ornamental purposes. But again, you can add those if you're looking for a little bit different color. The fruits, they have these large flower heads and fruiting heads. It ripens in August, and what I do is I just go and I snip off with a hand pruner, snip off each head, put them in a bucket or a tray. If you've got smaller amounts, you can put them on trays and put them in the freezer, and they come off the heads pretty easily. You just pull them out of the freezer once they're fully frozen, and the stems are more brittle, and you can easily take the berries off the heads once they're frozen. You can do it while they're fresh, but since the berries are pretty soft at that point, then it just makes a little bit more mess, but either way works. And yeah, you can, the last point on the slide, you can prune them if you want to keep them smaller. You can prune them more aggressively, like a knockout rose, or maybe not quite as aggressively as that. Most of the varieties will fruit on both old wood and new wood. So if it starts growing in the springtime in early April, and that new growth that season will put out flowers as well as the previous season's growth. So even if you cut them down, most varieties, if you cut them low, you will still get some berry production off of them. Beach plum, another shrub and also a native shrub to much of the eastern seaboard. This guy is adapted to growing in full sun. In the wild, you'll see it growing. Actually, I'll flip to the next slide here. This is just growing on a sandy dune on the beach. This is out in Delaware at Cape Henlopen. So they are perfectly adapted to growing in sandy areas. They can handle a bit of salt spray. If you live on the bay or live on the ocean, that's something that you might consider adding to your landscape. You can plant it as a hedge, or in a naturalized bed. You can plant it individually. The photo in the bottom here is where I live in my home landscape. I have it planted kind of as a border, not quite a hedge, or not a formal hedge. This picture was taken in October, and this was before I pruned them back. So it does have some kind of hairy growth that's popping up there. I just waited until the leaves fell before before pruning that. It kind of looks like kind of shaggy and unkempt there. But yeah, you can always nip it back to keep it in line, depending on you know, how much of a hedge you want it to be. It's in bloom right now. If I look out the window where I'm sitting here, I can see that the row of beach plum in bloom. So I planted this in 2017. I got 25 shrubs, a bundle of 25 from the Maryland State Nursery, and I planted them out. When I received them, they look like tiny little, you know, little pencils with a little bit of roots on them. I planted those in late April, and again tried to water them, especially that first season. And I put down a thick layer of mulch not too long after I got them in the ground. Year 3, this is what they look like. Again, before they leafed out, well, they're still dormant. And so they grew quite a bit. And this is the picture that I took just a little bit ago. On April 17th of this year, they're just starting to bloom. And I think this is the earliest that they had bloomed. So I got flowers off of them. I think year 3 was the first year that they flowered or had significant flower production. And so they get established relatively quickly, as you can see, even from these small bare root plants. And okay, yeah, I showed you this as a smaller image, but that's what it looked like in October of this past year. So that's after I harvested the fruit. In the springtime, when they're full of blooms, in my planting, I go back here, there is kind of variable bloom time. These are seedlings, so they're not genetically identical, they're not grafted, so there will be some variation in bloom time just because of the different genetics there. And so skipping forward, when they're in bloom, this is on the right. That image there is a plot up at Cornell University. So they've got blooms all along the fruiting stems. And if you check out that bumblebee in the photo on the left, that's one I took out here in my yard a couple days ago. So you can see they've got these kind of, the stems are just loaded with flowers, like these flower spikes. So yeah, beautiful, full of pollinators. If you wanted to and had a large enough planting, you could nip some of those out and bring them inside and put them in a vase as a nice seasonal cut flower. Obviously, you wouldn't be getting fruit off that, but you could take some of it in the house as a cut flower, just loaded with blossoms. And if you talk about pollinator value, I think these guys have a place in any pollinator garden. Some of our shrubs, just with their profusion of blooms, are a great source of nectar and pollen for some of these earlier season pollinators. And this is what the fruit looks like. So they're relatively small, like dime to quarter size. So think of kind of like a grape. They have a plum flavor, and the flesh itself is sweet, but the skin is tart. And since they have a lot of skin for the amount of flesh, they are fairly tart. So if you like tart candies and things like that, then you might like these. I like eating them fresh. You can also make them into jams and jellies. They cook up pretty nicely. And as far as harvesting, since they do grow close together on those fruiting branches, you can kind of harvest them by raking them off the branch into a bucket. So it's not, even though they're small, they're not the most tedious fruit to pick. All right, Moving into a couple trees, we have Serviceberry, and I'm just really referring to the whole genus Amelanchier. There's a number of different species native to different parts of the eastern U.S. and other parts farther west in the U.S. They are pretty common in the nursery industry, and so you can find them without a whole lot of looking. Already at a lot of nurseries, they sell Amelanchier. Typically, they'll sell them as a multi-stem tree. So in numbers like 5 trunks or 7, usually you'll find them in odd numbers. And they can tolerate a fairly wide range of soils. Some can tolerate fairly droughty soils. So if you have a drier location, again, you still want to water it when you're getting it established, especially, but these tend to be a bit more drought tolerant than some of the other landscape plants. It's a large shrub or compact tree, again, depending on the species and how you choose to prune it. They can have some issue with diseases. They are also in the rose family, like apples and pears, and so some of the ruft diseases that can be issues on apple trees are also an issue on some of the varieties of Serviceberry. And here in the photo, you see it is kind of used as a specimen tree in that more formalized garden look with that boxwood hedge around it. So it can be used in more formal gardens as well as a more natural looking garden. You can kind of consider it as an alternative to the Bradford pear or Callery pear. So on I think it's the next slide here, if I can get it to advance. There you go. It's white blooms in the springtime, and its size of some of the larger varieties make it somewhat of an alternative to ornamental pears. It does have a different structure to it, so it's not. It doesn't have the same pyramid type shape as a pear tree, but it has that white blooms in the spring, and so in some cases can be a Bradford or ornamental pear alternative. You can see it in commercial landscape settings. So on the left is next to a restaurant in a commercial landscape, and on the right, that's actually the Silver Spring Civic Center growing in a courtyard there. And again, they've got that multi-stem version there in that courtyard area. So yeah, it can fit in pretty seamlessly to an ornamental landscape and also provide some delicious fruit. The fruit is kind of a blueberry size. It's sweet. It does have, in my mind, it's kind of a hint of cherry. They are pretty early ripening. I think they're the earliest ripening of any of the fruits that I'll talk about tonight. So early to mid-June. And these are good for fresh eating or in preserves. They do have seeds. The seeds are bigger than a blueberry, but they're not as big as or as hard to chew as like a raspberry. So noticeable seeds, but not huge. If you see in that smallest image there, that is one of the rust disease that I mentioned that you will sometimes find on these. You can see it on the leaves. It can infect the leaves and can also infect the fruit. So that is something to watch out for. There are, like I mentioned, a lot of varieties that are readily available from local nurseries. Not all of those varieties, most of those varieties were not selected for their fruit quality. So if you want to grow it specifically for fruit quality, there are some other varieties to look for. And the handout that I shared lists a couple names of some of the varieties that tend to have larger fruits. In parts of Saskatchewan and Alberta and British Columbia, there is a commercial industry where they will, they'll grow what they call Saskatoon berries, and so sometimes you can find jam from Canada, jams or jelly made out of what they call Saskatoon berry, which is a species of Amelanchier. Just kind of an interesting fact. So you can look for some of those varieties that are developed specifically for their fruit production. Continuing with the trees is a species of pear, Asian pear, and this is a great tree and that performs pretty well, especially in the heat of southern Maryland. It's a tree. So depending on how you prune your fruit tree, it can get up to about 25 feet or so, with white blooms in April. Being in the rose family, it does have more disease issues. So the most concerning is fire blight. That's a bacterial disease, and depending on the weather conditions on a given year, that can cause dieback of branches, branch tips, or large branches. And in susceptible varieties, that can be a big issue. That can kill entire trees back to the graft union. So certainly look for varieties that are resistant or more tolerant of fire blight. It can also get some of the rust diseases, but fire blight is the most concerning of the diseases for Asian pear. Here is an example of one. This is actually growing out at the Y Research and Education Center on the eastern shore of Maryland. They were doing a study on commercial production of Asian pear, but this is an example of what an established Asian pear could look like in your yard. So this one, of course, has been pruned well and taken good care of throughout the years, and so that's why you see it very productive and full of fruits here. And these are just, I think, a few weeks away from harvest. But just really, loaded with fruit. So it's a great tree. Again, it performs really well in southern Maryland, and is faster to bearing than some of your other fruit trees. So if folks are interested in growing fruit trees, I would look at this one before you'd want to think about growing something like apples. I just think it performs better in most cases, especially in southern Maryland, than most of the apples. And the good thing is you can actually graft Asian pear onto other species of pear. So if you have the invasive Callery pear, or often called Bradford pear, if you have those around your property, you can graft it over to an Asian pear and use that Callery pear as a rootstock. When you purchase them, there's a couple different varieties of different species of pear that typically they use as a rootstock to graft on Asian pear. And the photo down here is just an example of what the really premium fruit that you might find at an Asian grocery store would look like. So typically the fruit that, unless you're thinning fruit, the fruit that you get off a tree wouldn't be quite that that large. If you've never had Asian pear, I encourage you to try some. Pick them up at the grocery store in the fall, and it has the crunch of an apple and the juiciness of a European pear. So I think it's kind of the best of both worlds when it comes to pears. So great eating quality. So check out some of those cultivars listed there for more fire blight tolerance. All right, I got a couple more trees here to go. American persimmon. Maybe you have tried this. If you grew up in the region, it's native to eastern U.S., and you can find it in the woods around southern Maryland. And this is the one where if you don't wait till it's fully soft and ripe, it can really make your mouth pucker. So you want to be careful. Make sure it's fully ripe before you eat that. In the landscape, there's an example of what it looks like in the landscape. This is at the College of Southern Maryland in La Plata. It's planted in the just in the turf area there. It has kind of a I guess more meandering trunk shape, so it's not the straightest central leader tree. So it's a little bit different look. You could think of it as more of a specimen tree. I will say that it is somewhat slow to leaf out in the spring, and it's one of the earlier to lose its leaves in the fall. So just take that as a note. If you want something that's leafing out right away, this is definitely not the one to choose. And it can get leaf spot diseases, leaf spot issues later on in the season. It blooms in May to early June, and the flowers are really inconspicuous. You really have to take a close look to notice that it's even blooming. So you don't grow it for the blossom, because it doesn't have a spring color show, but the fall colors can be nice. So there's what the green fruit look like in the summertime before they have ripened. So they, depending on the variety, about quarter to $half sized fruit. They turn orange, and they ripen late in the fall, so late October to November, and they remain attached to the tree after the leaves fall. So the bottom photo there, it looks almost like little Christmas ornaments hanging on the tree. If you look up in the fall after a lot of the leaves have fallen and you see that, then it's a good chance it is an American persimmon. And again, you want to wait until those fruits get completely ripe and very soft before you eat them, so they'll lose most of their astringency. It might still be a lingering astringency, so give your mouth kind of that dry feeling. But they're very sweet and have kind of a unique flavor to them. The trees are dioecious, so they have separate male and female trees. So if you're walking around the woods, maybe on a nature hike or on your property, and you see some in the fall that you've identified as persimmon, but they don't have any fruit, well, the male trees will never have fruit, because they're dioecious with separate male and female trees. There's a number of developed cultivars. The wild ones are edible. The fruit varies in size. They tend to be smaller than some of the developed varieties. So there's a number of kind of hobbyist breeders that have selected for larger fruiting American persimmons. And I have a list of those on the resource handout sheet. But those are harder to find in the nursery industry, but there's a number of mail order places that you can purchase American persimmons from, and those would be grafted. So if you're trying to identify them in the wild, I always look for that really chunky, blocky, like crocodile-looking bark. That's kind of typical of American persimmon, at least on the mature, established trees. Their Asian cousin, the Asian persimmon, It's larger fruiting, and it's a bit smaller tree, and it grows very well in southern Maryland, and it has some pretty nice fall colors, like you can see in that photo, with glossy green leaves during the rest of the season. So you can see the fruit, and you can find these certainly at Asian grocery stores, and some of the warehouse clubs will sell these in season. So look for them in November, December, and into January in the stores, as well as some of the grocery stores will sell them. It's very important to note that there are astringent varieties of Asian persimmon, and you only want to eat those when they're very soft. And then there are ones that are designated as non-astringent, and I have non-astringent pictured here. And these ones you can eat when they are hard as an apple, or you can wait until they're soft, and they won't make your mouth pucker like American persimmons or like the astringent Asian, cultivars of Asian persimmon. So be sure you know what you're ordering. If you want one that you can eat when it's hard as an apple, then you, I'm sorry, on my slide I have it backwards. So the astringent ones you would eat when soft, and the non-astringent varieties you can eat when they're hard as an apple. I apologize for it. So it should be reversed as what I have on the slide there. In the landscape, you can see, like in the bottom photo, green glossy leaves, and so they're pretty ornamental, just as a landscape tree. And in the case of the astringent varieties, you pick them, or the non-astringent varieties, you pick them at this stage in the photo when the leaves are still on the tree. This is what they look like when they're still green. This is actually in College Park. So the property owner here planted them along the sidewalk. So as you're walking to class through this neighborhood, you can see these Asian persimmons just leaning over the fence there. So these are pretty good sized trees. Again, another shot of a tree in a landscape. This one's been pruned to have more of an open structure, and as you can see, it's loaded with fruit. And in this case, there were some European hornets that had also found the fruit and were having a good time. Unfortunately, carving out some big chunks of some of the fruit, but there was still plenty of fruit left to harvest on these trees. So it can be very productive. Sometimes there's the issues with fruit drop. So this sometimes you'll get inconsistent bearing with Asian persimmons. All right, my last one. This is another native tree, native to much of the eastern U.S., throughout the Appalachian region, and you can find it throughout southern Maryland. It likes to live in the wild. It likes to live in generally moist soils. You can find it oftentimes along riversides and riverbanks. And in the landscape, you can see it has kind of a unique, somewhat pyramid shape. So slightly reminiscent, as far as the tree architecture, slightly reminiscent of an ornamental pear, but the leaf shape is just very different than most other trees. So it gives it kind of a tropical look. Those really large oval leaves are, I think, pretty unique. It blooms from March to May, usually somewhere in April, with these large kind of maroon blossoms. One of the good things is that this generally is not browsed on by deer. There are a class of compounds in the leaves that make them not so palatable to deer and to some of your other mammal pests. So you could think of it as a specimen tree. You could grow it in a row, like in this landscape. These are in Ohio, I believe. And so it has, again, kind of a unique look to it. The fruit itself, if you haven't tried it, I encourage you to. So you can find it growing wild in many parts of southern Maryland. And if you look starting late August through September, that's typically when they'll ripen in the wild. They are a tropical fruit. They are the temperate cousin of the custard apple family. So most of their related species grow in warmer climates. So the flavor is kind of crossed between like a banana and a mango. It's somewhat creamy, almost like an avocado, but it doesn't have it's not fatty like an avocado, but its texture is similar. It's hard to describe, so I encourage you to try one this fall, and try one before you plant it because it is a unique flavor. Some people really love it. I love it, and others could live without it. So there are developed varieties that have more consistent fruit flavor and larger fruit than just the wild ones that you would find out in the woods. So the one in the picture there that's cut open, that's not quite ripe. They're a little bit softer than that when they're fully ripe. And they are becoming increasingly available from a number of nurseries, mostly from mail order nurseries. There's a number of selected varieties that are available now. So there's the series that have been bred by a Pawpaw breeder, Neil Peterson, and they're all named after rivers in the area, like Susquehanna, Potomac, and Shenandoah, as well as a number of other varieties. They're kind of a cool, unique fruit. Some of the challenges are that it does take longer for these to come into bearing in the landscape, and the fruits really have a short shelf life. So once they become ripe, they don't hang on the tree for very long, and once you pick them, they ripen fairly quickly. And so you really have to think of it as although you can freeze them, like I have a picture with the ice cube tray. You can put them in an ice cube tray and freeze them to use them in smoothies and things like that. They're best enjoyed as a fresh fruit, and there's pretty limited window because they ripen, and kind of like a banana. You might like them when there's no yellow on them, or when there's no brown on them, and then the flavor quickly changes, similar to a banana going through its stages of ripening. But certainly a unique fruit and a interesting native fruit for our part of the country. So yeah, I encourage you to check those out. If you've never tried them, maybe you can find some this fall and see if you like them, and think about adding them to your landscape down the road. So that's it for those fruits that I wanted to share with you tonight. And just to kind of recap, I think we can use our landscapes and plant plants that have really a variety of benefits. We can provide fresh, healthy food for ourselves, as well as habitat for pollinators and birds. And we can really have beautiful landscape plants that are also useful in the kitchen. So with that, I just wanted to share a couple resources many of you I think are familiar with, but Home and Garden Information Center certainly has a lot of additional information on gardening in general. You can check out some of the resources there, the Ask an Expert feature on that website as well as on our county extension website. You can click that Ask an Expert button if you have a question. There's Marilyn Grove's blog, which has a lot of great timely gardening information, as well as the HGIC YouTube channel. If you're not a master gardener, I encourage you to consider joining. If you're in Charles County, we'd love to have you as part of the Master Gardener Volunteer Program in Charles County. Folks that love to garden and want to share that with others. And with that, that's what I have for my presentation tonight. So I'll take any questions that you might have in the chat, as well as just a reminder, if you wanted to check out that handout, it's a 2-page PDF. If you go to that link that I just put in the chat, then in the description for tonight's talk, you'll see the hyperlinked text to download the handout for tonight. That'll have some resources. I have a list of different sources where you can find some of these plants, not as an endorsement of them, but just as a resource for you to use if you're trying to source some of these plants, because that can be one of the tricky things about growing some of these more unique fruits is that you can't oftentimes go down to your local nurseries or big box stores and find them. Some of them, again, are more widely available than others. So, yeah, if anyone has any questions, let's see, questions in the chat, you can toss those in there and I can do my best to answer those. All right, so in the chat, we have a question. Do you know if beach plums can handle clay soil, or are they best grown in sandy soil? That's a good question. Yeah, I know their native habitat is sandy soil, those sandy dunes. I'm not sure. I mean, I would give them a try. Out here, I don't have perfectly sandy soil. It's more of a loam or sandy loam, and they've been pretty happy with that. So I don't know. I don't have a conclusive answer for you on that one. But I would give them a try. With some of these unique fruits that don't have a big commercial industry, there isn't as much research-based information out there about them. I know that they're growing them at the research farm in Upper Marlboro, and I'm not sure what soil type they're growing on there. I could ask Dave Myers what kind of soil they're growing in out there. And any other questions? And thank you to everyone that tuned in. All right. Okay. And hopefully I'm not missing any. I think all the questions, if you put them in the chat. I don't know if I see the Q&A, if that's okay. Looks like they're all. Oh, okay. I just see there's a question I missed from earlier about recommending, is there a good home spraying program or resource that I like to use? And I would say, as far as home spraying program, that Virginia Tech, and they're actually the Virginia Tech publication is the one that's linked to on the HGIC page under tree fruit. And it's a big PDF. It's like 300 plus pages. But if you go to chapter 3, because it's separated out by category, chapter 3 is on home fruit. And so they talk about key pests. So it's separated by crop. Again, on Chapter 3, there's about 2 or 3 pages for key pests and diseases of each of the crops. And then it talks about chemical controls, and I believe it has a spray program there. Talks about the plant stage at this bloom stage, apply this product, and so forth. I know it's kind of imposing when you download this gigantic PDF, but not all of it is for home fruit. And a couple more questions here. All right. Let me see. Okay, question about blueberry tree, or I assume blueberry shrub, blueberry bush. It was fine with berries for several years, including last year, but now the upper branches appear to be dead, but shoots are coming out at the bottom of the trunk. Is it worth keeping? And I would say, yeah, with blueberries, as far as pruning, you want to keep a balance of older and new wood. So you want to prune out the old stuff periodically. Each year, prune out the older, I believe, like anything that's 4 years or older, prune that. So it's continuously getting a new flush of growth, while keeping some of the more productive, like 2 to 3 year branches, and removing some of the older ones. So if you still have green growth on it, I would say, yeah, I would keep that. But think about doing some renewal pruning in the dormant season. There's some really great YouTube videos out there on pruning blueberry bushes from a couple different extension services. Have some pretty good YouTube video tutorials on that. Another question: what is the Maryland State Nursery you mentioned for ordering plug plants? So I mentioned the Maryland State Nursery. That is operated by the state of Maryland. It is not. It's not open right now because of the COVID-19, and they ship during the springtime, and they only ship in bundles of 25. So you have a minimum order of 25, and can order in increments of 25. So that kind of limits things, but they're very reasonably priced. So Maryland State Nursery, if you Google Maryland State Nursery, you can pull up their website. They're based on the Eastern Shore, and they ship during the dormant season, so early spring to later spring as bare root only. Okay, and then USDA. Okay, thanks. Ellen shared a link. There's a USDA fact sheet about beach plum that I don't think all panelists can see the chat. Unfortunately, I'll have to set that up differently next time. But I will get that information to the person that had that question about beach plum and their ideal soils. Any other questions? If not, thank you everyone for tuning in. And I'll be doing 2 more webinars upcoming Wednesdays at 6 p.m. So feel free to tune into those, and I will share this link once I get it uploaded. I think it'll be hosted on YouTube, so I'll send out that link. And thanks to everyone. Have a good night.